Thank you, John, for that very kind introduction. And it's lovely to be with everyone. It also feels a very timely opportunity for us to be together because things are changing in the world rapidly. And it seems to me that we're at a point, both individually and collectively and within our human journey, where transformational times are upon us. And so for me, as a scientist and as someone who has researched, studied, explored the nature of reality all my life, I'm delighted that we're at a point in our human journey where leading edge science is now converging with universal spirituality, ancient and indigenous wisdom teachings into an integral whole world view. And my sense of why that's important and relevant to each and every one of us, regardless of whether we're scientists, but surely and only really because we're all human beings living on our planet, our beloved planetary home Gaia, is that our worldview drives our behaviors. And until now, other than our spirituality and our inner perceptions of a wider, more unified nature of the world, our outside world, our societies have collectively held a mainstream paradigm of materialism and separation. And our worldviews drive our behaviors. So if our worldview is fragmented, if we buy into a perception of reality that is solely materialistic and built up of separate things, then we act accordingly. And those actions, a worldview of separation, has literally driven a world of suffering. You know, in a worldview of separation, conflict and competition and natural behaviors and outcomes, yet a worldview that is unified, that is unitive, that is integral, naturally drives a world of peace, a world of equality, a world of love. And so what I'm hopefully able to share with you today is the new science of a cosmology of consciousness, a new science of love, showing that everything in reality, multidimensional reality, is innately related. And this really does speak to the understanding of Theosophy. It speaks to a universe that is essentially alive, a universe that exists to evolve, a world in which we as human beings, and indeed everything in existence, has meaning and purpose, and a world that offers us benevolence, offers us the possibility to learn and evolve and grow. And this is the teaching of Theosophy, but this is a teaching of many spiritual traditions and indigenous wisdom teachings. When I was 4 years old, I had my first experience of multidimensional realities. I was in my room at home in the north of England, and a discarnate light came into that room, and I began to hear an inner voice speaking to me. And as a child of 4, it wasn't supernatural or paranormal. It was very natural. And that voice, which subsequently sometime later told me, gave me a name of Thoth, also opened my experiences of walking between worlds that continue to this day. So for me, what I'm about to share today and the evidence for what I'm about to share today has been part of an intrinsic part of my lived experience literally all my life. And so after nearly 65 years of that ongoing exploration, the realization and the understanding that new discoveries are revealing a reality, an integral reality that is very, very similar, not just to my experiences, but to those of numerous spiritual seekers throughout all the ages, is a great joy, because this world, this whole world understanding, which is very coherent and I hope resonant with the teachings of Theosophy, offer us an empowered and inspired foundation to make our choices now at this truly pivotal moment of choice for our entire human race. So new discoveries, many of them, I've written a book about this called The Cosmic Hologram, in formation at the center of creation. And when that book was published 4 years ago or thereabouts, 4.5 years ago, it turned out I was not just writing a book, I was actually co-founding a movement to share the message of this integral reality, to share its understanding of unity awareness and of unity articulated, expressed, and embodied in diversity, but also to experience that and to embody that in our lives. So part of that co-founding of the movement, we've called a WholeWorld-View, is a website, WholeWorld-View.org. And in that, our growing community of change makers around the world have shared this message, what these new discoveries are, this new science of love, and what it may mean for all of us as we make our collective choices now, and as we move forward into this incredible time of turbulence and challenge and breakthrough, as well as breakdown. This, for me, is the opportunity for us to consciously evolve, to step into our cosmic destiny and to enter that new chapter of what it means to be human. So new discoveries within the last few years, literally, when I wrote the book, most of the discoveries, the hundreds of discoveries that I showed the evidence of in the cosmic hologram, had really come forward only in the last few years. But what they are enabling, and I think this is important because this is new evidence, this isn't just a hope, it's more than an inner experience of oneness and wholeness. It is the evidence within a consensual, scientifically based perspective of the nature of reality that is indeed converging with such universal spiritual experiences and perceptions. And what these new discoveries, these new scientific discoveries are showing and enabling is an integral perspective, because I talk of the convergence of science and spirituality, but it actually moves beyond both. It actually offers a truly integral perspective of the nature of reality, the whole world nature of reality. And what it's showing is the appearance of our universe, its energy and matter, its space and time, are themselves emergent phenomena arising from deeper, non-physical levels of intelligence, of cosmic intelligence and mind, causative realms of intention, and how these then play out in dynamic patterns at every scale of existence, from the most minute to the mightiest. And so in this coming half an hour, perhaps a little more, I'll share more about what those discoveries are and why they mean so much at this time, because these are discoveries, as I mentioned, both at the smallest scale of our universe, which is a scale now referred to as the Planck Scale, and that's spelled Planck. It's named after one of the great pioneers of quantum physics, Max Planck. And Planck basically said that in his perspective, the appearance of our universe was secondary. that its primary reality is consciousness. And 100 years or more after he said and spoke those words, we're now realizing and have the evidence to support the truth of what he perceived. So this Planck scale is minute in spatial terms, in terms of time. In spatial terms, it's a small 10 to the minus 35 meters in length, as small as to an atom as an atom is to our entire universe. And at its temporal scale, again, it's absolutely minute. It's 10 to the minus 44 seconds, which is far tinier compared to a second than a second is to the entire lifetime of our universe. Yet this minute scale is what discoveries are showing to be the basic pixelation, as it were, of the reality of our universe. Just as in our technologies, we have high definition video, high definition holograms. This scale, this Planck scale pixelation, is a trillion times smaller, more minute than the most perfect high definition of our current technologies. But what it is showing at this scale is, from this scale, everything we call the reality of our universe, from its very first moment to this moment and on for the rest of its life cycle, comes into being, emerges from those deeper levels of causation into the appearance of our beautiful world. And these new discoveries and the new framework, this whole worldview framework that I'll continue to share with you today, it was ushered in by quantum physics and relativity theory 100 or more years ago. And those two pillars of 20th century science were extraordinary in themselves. And what they did is they took the mechanistic world of Isaac Newton and the 19th century physicists, and they upended them. Because until then, the world had been seen in quite mechanistic descriptions, almost, mechanistic, like clockwork. And yet, Isaac Newton was probably the last alchemist, not only the first natural philosopher, or one of the first natural philosophers, which was the early name given to what then would become known as scientists. He was trying to understand the mind of God when he was discovering all his wondrous insights into gravity, into the nature of optics and light, and actually having to discover and invent, in fact, a new mathematics to describe what he was finding. But nonetheless, what he was finding was this, what he perceived as this great clockwork of a universe. But 300 years later, in the late years, very last years of the 19th century and the earliest years of the 20th century, quantum physicists such as Max Planck and Niels Bohr and Erwin Schrödinger, and of course the great Albert Einstein, were discovering a very, very different perspective of the nature of reality. But they didn't just throw away all the scientific research and discoveries over the previous 300 years. They just expanded them. They expanded their perception. And in fact, even now, when we travel to the moon, we're still using Newtonian mathematics and Newtonian mechanics to actually plot the orbits of spacecraft. And every day in our everyday lives, we understand Newtonian gravity that keeps us planted on this good Earth, this wondrous planetary home of ours, Gaia. But nonetheless, the quantum physics and the relativity physics of the 20th century actually themselves came forward because scientists were discovering anomalous phenomena In other words, phenomena they couldn't explain by the old Newtonian mechanistic paradigm. And when their new insights came forward, they were able to expand not only on what had gone before, but they were able to encompass the new discoveries within a wider, more comprehensive scientific framework. So basically what they discovered was that what they saw, the very small, the realm of the quantum scale, the scale of atoms and subatomic phenomena, they were discovering that when they observed something, which is one of the great tenets of scientific investigation, was that the observer is separate from what is observed and therefore does not affect it. So I can look at something and observe it as a scientist and not affect that object. But remarkably, what the quantum physicists were realizing, that certainly at those smallest scales, that was just not the case. When they were observing quantum phenomena, it was as if that phenomenon came into being by their very process of observing it. And so no more was an observer able to be separated from an observation. And that really set the cat amongst the pigeons, because all of the scientific methodology, how to deal with that. And interestingly enough, whilst in the last 100 years or so since then, quantum phenomena have actually formed right at the center, the core of our technologies, use quantum phenomena all the time. The deeper philosophical implications of that discovery were so peripheralized, held to the side. It sort of raised too many questions, I think, for too many folks as to what this really meant about the nature of reality. And so should it. And I think that's what we're coming round full circle now, to realize that we cannot any longer peripheralize the nature of consciousness. And that's what these new discoveries are insisting upon. We have to go beyond this perspective that we can either maintain or pretend somehow that observers are separate from their observations. And by they, I mean we. This is coming absolutely central into the nature of reality itself. The other thing that the quantum physicists discovered, and Albert Einstein himself was so unhappy about this discovery that he called it spooky action at a distance. But what they realized was in the inability to separate an observer from an observed, and a recognition that the observer actually affected what was observed. Underlying the mathematics of quantum physics was a requirement that our entire universe is integrally interconnected. It literally exists and evolves as a unified entity. Now that's called non-local connection. And by the 1980s, that was a theoretical requirement of quantum physics, but it was more a thought experiment than anything else. It was only by the 1980s that scientists were able to test it out, even at quantum scales and then progressively at larger scales. And sure enough, from those early experiments until today, it's being realized and understood that indeed our universe does exist and evolve as a unified entity, that it is non-locally connected, that Einstein's spooky action at a distance, in other words, beyond the limitations of space and time, is a true attribute of the nature of reality. Now, that doesn't mean that within space-time, such non-locality violates the nature of causality, because within space-time of our universe, there's a cosmic speed limit, and it's the speed of light. So nothing goes faster than the speed of light within space-time, and that is vital. Because if it did, and this is getting down rabbit holes into nerd territory, so I'll stop pretty quickly here. But just to say, if it did, we wouldn't be here. If it did, we wouldn't have the equivalence of energy and matter as Einstein realized in his the most famous equation of all time, E equals mc squared. We wouldn't have a direction of the flow of time from the very beginning of our universe till now. There would not be an inherent causality within space-time. So causality and the speed of light as a finite cosmic speed limit within our universe are key to its reality. And yet, at the same process, our universe's entirety knows itself as a whole unified entity. And this is wonderful because from essentially a spiritual perspective, this describes a universe that exists and evolves, experiences, explores, knows itself at ever greater levels of individuated self-awareness. Us, we are here now because we are microcosmic co-creators of our universe's reality. And yet we are part of its wholeness. It is within us, we are within it. Again, these are ancient wisdom, spiritual insights that leading edge science is essentially rediscovering and bringing to us now at a time where waking up to this collectively may make the difference between our extinction as a species and not only our survival, but our thrival and our flourishing as a species. So quantum physics was showing a very different world, but its findings of universal non-locality, its discovery that an observer actually affects what is observed, the fact that everything is vibrational, all energy is quantized. In other words, all energy is not a continuum. It is literally notes, quantized packets of energy. And that of itself is key to how our universal reality unfolds. So quantum physics was bringing this very different perspective, this vibration, resonant, harmonic nature of reality. And it was showing that everything is interrelated with everything else at all scales of existence. But that deeper, deeper insight that it was really offering into the nature of consciousness was pushed to the side. And the same thing happened with relativity. Einstein came forward, and when he was 16 years old, Einstein had a vision. And in that vision, he actually rode a beam of light. I always love that thought of him literally surfing a beam of light when he was 16 years old. But what it showed him is that regardless of where an observer is or when an observer is, that space is relative to that observer's location, and time is also relative to that observer. So of themselves, space and time are relative. And yet, and this is what a lot of people don't, and yet continue the sentence, is that, and what he discovered was we need to, in order to understand the reality of our universe, is to bring space and time into a fundamental relationship called space-time. So when we consider an event within our universe, it may be today on Earth, it may be, I'm a Star Wars fan, so in a galaxy far, far away and a long, long time ago. This is crucial because without space-time being invariant, the laws of physics could change. So to a scientist in a galaxy a long, long way away and a long, long time ago, the laws of physics may have been different. to what they are on Earth now, but that isn't the case. Everything we know about our universe says that the laws of physics throughout space and throughout time have been the same from the very first moment of its birth until now. So this again is really important because it's giving us insights into the reality of our universe, but very different to what previous scientists before the early 20th century, quantum physicists and Einstein, came forward. But of themselves, these two pillars of 20th century science weren't enough because they don't actually speak to each other as theoretical frameworks. We've tested them at every scale, and quantum physics works. Relativity theory works. Their description of energy and matter and space-time work. But whereas quantum physics, which describes energy matter, quantized energy matter, is great on that level, it can't get to grips with space-time. And space-time, which every effort to try and quantize it has so far failed, can't get to grips with quantum theory. So of themselves, these amazing insights into the nature of reality aren't enough. And we're now realizing a deeper perspective of why that is the case. And it's because energy and matter and space-time, as I mentioned, are not the fundamental nature of reality. They are what's called emergent phenomena. They emerge from more fundamental causative realms of intelligence. And this is key. The word intelligence is key. Because Einstein, who was a great believer, a great spiritual believer, in fact, many of the pioneers, including Max Planck, were spiritual believers. They were really like Isaac Newton was hundreds of years earlier. Really at the heart of what they were seeking was to understand the mind of God. And they may have called God by other names, but that really was at the heart and soul of what they were seeking. And Einstein's name for God was cosmic mind. There are many other names for the ineffable, the numinous, the ground of all being, great spirit, Allah, God, great mystery. But for Einstein, the name was cosmic mind. And what we're now realizing is that from the infinity and eternity of cosmic mind, that universes, and I'm using the plural, universe such as ours, arise not as great things, but as the great Victorian Sir James Jeans also said, more as a great thought rather than a great thing. A great thought, a finite thought of cosmic mind, of God. And so with that sense of the eternity and infinity of mind and cosmic intelligence, we're now gaining the evidence, the scientific-based evidence that indeed our universe, as a great thought rather than a great thing, emerges from these deeper, causative, intentional intelligences that is cosmic mind. And cosmic mind does so in what I consider to be the most beautiful, wonderful way of doing so. Because again, Einstein once said that reality of the world is as simple as it can be, but no simpler. And so the digitized information, the ones and zeros that enables us to have this conversation today, the ones and zeros that underpin all our communications technologies, where my words, my meaningful, I hope meaningful words, are being translated into ones and zeros of digitized information that then's transmitted through a camera, through a microphone, through a computer, through the internet, to be then reassembled into meaningful words that then enables this conversation to be had. Our universe, cosmic mind, articulates meaningful intention, meaningful nature of reality it articulates it into such digitized information. We have an English alphabet of 26 letters from A to Z. Each letter of itself is meaningless. I could throw them up into an alphabet spaghetti and it would have no meaning. But when each of us bring those letters of the alphabet into words and sentences and songs and poems and books and the spoken prose, it has meaning for us, for each of us, and different languages within our human family elicit meaning and understanding. But our universe has a universal alphabet of just 2 letters, ones and zeros. And from those 2 letters, all the meaning, the inherent, fundamental, or pervasive meaning of the existence and evolution of our universe is expressed as atoms, as stars, as planets, of plants, of people. From the very first moment of our universe, 13.8 billion years ago, this meaningful information has been the all-pervasive stuff that lies beneath and is expressed as the energy, matter, and space-time of our entire universe. And beyond that, we're also understanding cosmologically from our research, our discoveries of black holes of all phenomena, that the information of a star, that when a massive star, that when it is actually gravitationally collapses into a black hole, which is called a black hole because its gravitational attraction is so powerful that not even light can escape. So as that star ends its life as a black hole, on its 3-dimensional surface, all the information of its history, of its life as a star remains. It is not lost. And from that understanding of the informational content of a star's life continuing on its so-called event horizon of its black hole surface area, some very clever folks expanded that notion, which is called the holographic principle, to our entire universe. So what this is showing us, that the appearance of our universe, its energy, matter, and space-time, are themselves information, meaningful information at every scale of existence. But by expanding the so-called thermodynamics of understanding black holes to the whole universe, is the appreciation that that reality, the reality that we call the physical world, is holographically projected from the boundary of space, time. It's a radical view of reality, but discoveries at every scale are showing us the truth of it. And remarkably, this is not new in that sense, because 2,500 or more years ago, in ancient India, the great sages there, the rishis, the great wisdom teachers of ancient India, described reality as something they called Indra's net. And they described reality as comprised of a multitude of jewels, and each jewel had a myriad of facets, and each facet reflected the facets of all the other jewels, and the jewels were connected by golden threads of light. That for me is the most poetic description of what now leading edge science is describing, and what I write of as the cosmic hologram, as the reality of our universe. Because a hologram is quite remarkable in that if we take a human-made hologram, which is a projection of a 3-dimensional object, that three-dimensional projection, every tiny pixel, I mentioned the high definition of holograms earlier, every high definition pixel has the whole of that object within it. So the wondrous nature of a hologram is that the whole is in every part and every part contains the whole. And that is the nature of our universe. And that is the nature of our universe as described by Indra's net, but it's now what we're realizing and discovering at every scale of existence. The point is that this new emergent cosmology, this cosmology of consciousness, this science of love, is based on the primacy of mind and consciousness. It's describing a reality that of itself is multidimensional, which we'll come to a little while, but it's describing a world, a whole world where everything has meaning and purpose and which is guided by cosmic consciousness, where everything is digitized and meaningful in hyphen formation. This is not random data we're talking about. As I mentioned, this is this universal alphabet of 2 letters meaningfully embodied in all the energy, matter, and space-time of reality itself. So I put a hyphen just to show the meaningful nature, the purposeful nature of all that this is describing. In formation, that literally informs the holographically manifested forms. You and me and our planetary home, our stars, all the forms of our unified, entire and non-locally connected universe. This, for me, is the world, the reality that I've experienced all my life. It's a reality where everything in existence has meaning and purpose. And it's also a universe which just doesn't exist and evolve as a unified entity, but exists to evolve, where the information is expressed in complementary ways as quantized and conserved energy matter. So the energy matter of our universe today is exactly the energy matter of our universe at its first moment, 13.8 billion years ago, but it's changed its forms. But it actually is the same. You and I and all of us, we're now biological organisms. The first moment of the universe, everything that's now expressed in us was hydrogen. And then through the alchemy of stars became all the elements of the periodic table that then were pulled together in organic molecules and then ultimately evolved until today and beyond. But all of that energy then is conserved in the energy matter now. But the intelligence of our universe, the information of our universe is also expressed in the complementary way as what I describe as entropic space-time. And this is a new word, and it's a word that will be unfamiliar, I suspect, to most, if not all of you. But it relates back to a notion called entropy. And entropy has been described sometimes as a flow through time from a system's order to disorder. But actually that's been a quite fundamental misunderstanding of what that concept's about. And the discoverer of entropy, Ludwig Boltzmann, actually described the entropy of a system as its energetic microstates. So we're back to energy now. And what he basically said is that as time flowed, the number of energetic microstates of a system always increases. So from essentially from simplicity to complexity. But what we've been able to do in the last few years with all of these discoveries coming forward is to realize that entropy can be expanded from its so-called thermodynamic perspective of heat and energy to entropy, and realizing that it can be expanded to describe the informational content of a system. So if you think of the informational content of a system, as time flows, there's ever more information. At the end of this sentence has more information held within it than the beginning of this sentence. Yesterday, our universe had less informational content than it has today because time has flowed. So by expanding the notion of entropy to entropy, from energetic microstates to informational content, and adding a hyphen, because everything in existence and evolution is meaningful and therefore informed, not just random, we have a notion that enables us to describe a universe that exists, where its existence is expressed as energy matter, and evolves, where its evolution is expressed through the expansion of space and the flow of time. We have a universe that is as simple as it can be to exist and evolve as a unified entity, where it can experience and explore and learn and evolve and be, from simplicity to complexity, and ever greater levels of individuated and collective self-awareness. This sentence on this slide really comes home to what Theosophy teaches us, because these discoveries at every scale of existence, from the atomic scale to the scale of our everyday lives, to the scale of our solar system, to the scale of vast clusters of galaxies, to the whole universe, shows that our universe exists and evolves. As I say, from simplicity, from the most simple, hydrogen, to 94 elements and to planets. And our Earth, our beloved planetary home Gaia, has every single one of those 94 natural occurring elements within her planetary being, which I find wondrous. So from simplicity to complexity is a unified, multidimensional, which encompasses what describes as supernormal phenomena, encompasses archetypal intelligences, encompasses our very beings as spiritual beings having a human experience. It speaks to our souls. It speaks to our spirits. It speaks to all of whom we are and encompasses all of that as a non-locally connected entity. It innately naturalizes such multidimensional communications and supernormal phenomena. From the age of 4 that I experienced, telepathic communications, remote cognition, the appreciation of the everyday miracles of synchronicities, our superpowers of intuition, all of this whole world view encompasses these as natural phenomena and natural attributes of who we really are. And so it integrates with universal spirituality and ancient and indigenous wisdom teachings, such as Theosophy. It reveals itself in universal and dynamic patterns and processes throughout not just the natural world, but human systems and behaviors and at all scales. So for example, these beautiful patterns that I'm showing, this gorgeous, it's called the Lorentz attractor or the butterfly attractor. And this beautiful sort of sense of a Mobius strip or a figure of 8 reflects in what's called phase space, is this non-physical dimensions of causation. This represents our climate, weather patterns throughout the world. And you can see that it's held within a basin, if you were, a boundary of behavior. But these patterns, these mathematical informational patterns that then emerge as the appearance of our universe are similar patterns. So example, we find the sort of fractal patterns are the same when there are phase transitions in atoms, say between one state of reality and another, ice to water, whatever it might be. The electrons of those atoms cluster in patterns that are the same patterns that vast clusters of galaxies form. We find that ecosystems, for example, underlying the complexity of biological ecosystems are the same patterns that underlie the internet, the node points, the sort of websites and the connectivity of the internet is exactly the same in patterning terms as ecosystems. We find that, for example, the frequency and the power of earthquakes, when they're graphed together, when their relationship is understood, is exactly the same as the relationship between the incidence of human conflicts and the destructive scale of their fatalities. Just let that be with you for a moment, to realize that when we observe and plot and track earthquakes, first of all, we find that the relationship that connects all earthquakes is very simple. An earthquake that is twice as powerful in its destructive force on a logarithmic scale is 4 times less likely to happen. That is it. That is the fundamental relationship. It's a harmonic relationship between the frequency and the power. There have been analyses of conflicts, of world wars, of 300 or more years of conflicts. One meta-analysis was done just after the Second World War by researcher Lewis Richardson, and a later one more recently at the University of Florida by Neil Johnson and his team. And they showed that for conflicts from the scale of world wars to the scale of insurgencies in Iraq and Afghanistan, that relation between the frequency of the conflict and the destructive power of the nature of the number of fatalities was the same relationship as between the frequency and the destructive power of earthquakes. So if nothing else shows us, all these discoveries are revealing that we are not in any way separate from the natural world, that we are an innate, integral aspect of its individuated and collective intelligence. So this emergent whole world view is showing that mind and consciousness aren't something we have, because that's always been the hard question of the old paradigm of materialistic and separatist science. How does immaterial mind arise from a material brain? This is showing it's the wrong question. It's just the wrong question. And if we ask a wrong question, we're not going to get a right answer. What these new discoveries are showing is that mind and consciousness aren't something we have, but literally what we and the whole world are. Our universe is a finite thought in an infinite and eternal cosmos. We're inseparable. And when it began 13.8 billion years ago, it didn't begin in a big bang, which wasn't big And it wasn't the implied chaos of a bang. Instead, as we now know, it began, yes, minute, its most minute scale, but it began in an incredibly ordered and exquisitely fine-tuned way. So instead of a big bang, it was the first moment of that beautifully ordered, meaningful, big breath, an ongoing big breath, which again reflects the ancient wisdom of reality as being a great out-breath of Brahma, the great out-breath of God. So we are inseparable within this amazing universe where that initial order and fine-tuning and innate simplicity, everything though was there. The laws of physics, the relationships, the informational meaningfulness was there, not just for our universe to exist as a unified entity, not just to exist and evolve as a unified entity, but literally embodying an innate evolutionary impulse to evolve, exist to evolve from simplicity to complexity. Everything in existence has meaning and purpose. As I mentioned earlier, what this is showing us is what universal spiritual traditions, what Theosophy shows us, is that we are our universes, microcosmic co-creators, and we are its evolutionary co-partners. We literally, at this moment, stand on the bow wave of our universe's evolutionary impulse. We stand on its bow wave of future possibility and potential for individuated self-awareness and evolutionary consciousness. This, I would suggest, is our moment of choice. With this emergent understanding, with this whole worldview framework, this theosophical framework now fully evidenced, what do we now choose to co-envisage and co-create together? And thank you, everyone. I'd like at this point to invite John to join me again and see whether we have any explorations, any questions that we might like to explore together.
I do have a couple of questions that I hope will not be considered irrelevant, but, just the information that you provided, especially at the start with the new developments in discoveries and this great progression in scientific understanding. How is it that we still have so many extraordinarily intelligent, qualified, respected scientists, astrophysicists, quantum physicists, all sorts of scientists who are still very much wedded to the materialistic views?
It's an excellent question, John, and it's one that I, on my down moments, I do get frustrated by. But I guess people come to awareness when they come to awareness. And I think there are a couple of reasons I think that perhaps do underpin this. One is that modern science, and by that I mean Newtonian science and Copernican science and Galilean science, really began with natural philosophers wanting to explore the world. But at the time, the Roman Catholic Church was the authority. And it was quite dangerous, actually, to explore beyond a certain remit of discovery. And so a view arose that, you scientists, you natural philosophers, you look after the physical world, and we will look after the spiritual world. And of course, the two are inseparable. But because of that authority and that perspective, an initial schism began that became wider and wider and wider. And so for many scientists still, mind and consciousness are associated with religion and this ancient perspective of authority. And so even as I mentioned, with the quantum physics and relativity of the 20th century, where many of the pioneers were incredibly spiritual people and really perceived this as an expansion of the understanding of the mind of the cosmos and cosmic mind and God, for most scientists went along with that perspective of discomfort of anything that really brought mind and consciousness into the center of those explorations, which I think is really why over the last 80 years, progress has really been technological rather than philosophical. You know, those deeper questions and answers about the nature of reality have sort of been put to one side. But just as at the end of the 19th century, where anomalous phenomena were forcing scientists, like it or not, to expand their perspectives, these discoveries are forcing folks, like it or not, into this greater understanding. And actually, you know, I think it's taken a while as well for physicists and other scientists to get their head around the nature of information, because they deal with it every day. But for many, unless they've actually on their own inner journey and, you know, this own quest for their own inner sense of experience and meaning, they've sort of relegated information to sort of signaling and data and all the rest of it. The evidence is now showing us that information, meaningful information, literally is the stuff of reality. So I think we're on a cusp. I think if you were to ask that question again in 5 years' time, I think hopefully they'll be very different. Far more of us saying it, but there are more and more of us now linking up and lifting up, you know, with this emergent perspective.
Well, wonderful. We'll have to meet again and discuss this again in 5 years. So you write it down in your schedule and I'll put it on mine. But just one other question or a thought with regards the cosmic mind or consciousness, this base fundamental that is now seen to be the source from what you've presented. It in itself, would you say that it has any characteristic, like if it exists, is it impermanent? Does it have a beginning? Does it? Is there any characteristic of it?
I love this question because I was asking myself this question at 4 years old. Where's the end of this? Where is it? And all I can say is that I, as in a human form, in my human form, I cannot really understand infinity and eternity. All my explorations, walking between worlds, I've explored multidimensional realms. And at the very silent, at the most holding of no thingness, I can sense to touch infinity. I can just about sense to touch eternity. And that's what all of the ancient universal spiritual traditions tell us is the ground of all being. But it is called great mystery for a great reason. And yet when I walk between worlds, which I've done and you know, communicated, engaged with many, many different levels of sentience and awareness and guidance and insight and soul level connections, I also appreciate that what is coming forward now does encompass such multidimensional intelligence and meaning. It does enable us to appreciate our soul level intelligence and awareness, and how we can bring that expanded levels and awareness of who we are through our human experience. Because this, for me, is what's really important now. For so many, you know, we've limited our experience of reality because society's told us it's only material and separate, and any other view is nonsense. And yet this is showing us that that is nonsense. That is fundamentally wrong. This is the nature of reality and our realities and our natural attributes. So for me, naturalizing these multidimensional explorations is part of what our conscious evolution is about, and how far that will take us beyond the perceived limitations into that deeper immersion into the ocean of cosmic mind. I don't know, but I know that I want to say yes to the adventure. And I'd love us to, as a society and as a human family, say yes to that adventure. Because for me, the key thing at the moment, before we even go into all of the cosmic adventure, is healing our relationships with ourselves, with each other, and with our planetary home Gaia, because the materialist, separate mindset worldview has literally driven a world of suffering. And we have so much trauma that, you know, is ours to heal and release now, and so much healing of our relationship with our planetary home, Mother Earth Gaia, and all her children. So for me, that is the most important aspect of what this is showing us.
Excellent. I just to come back to the idea of consciousness, though, do you think that the use of the word itself, consciousness or cosmic mind, is, I mean, it's just a label for this mystery that
Yes,
we don't really know?
it is. I guess from my perspective, well, a number of things. First of all, I do feel that we're at a time when, as we expand our awareness, then expanding our language, because we communicate generally through language. You know, we're coming forward with new languaging. You know, the new science, its new narrative is calling forward new stories, and those stories are calling forward new songs. And also because the supernormal authenticity of non-verbal, intuitive connections are there for us to really empower our everyday lives. We can also transcend the limits of spoken or written language too, because this truly is a science of love, and love transcends all and every language. So all of this I feel is important, and yet I also feel that what this is also crucially offering us is an opportunity to expand our consensus reality. Now, if we don't have a consensus reality, it's a very lonely world. And science is ultimately, when it does its job properly, which is to follow the evidence wherever it leads, offers us consensus. You know, it's probably our best consensual story or narrative, but of itself, it needs to follow this evidence, because it's stopped at a point which is unsustainable and fundamentally inaccurate and wrong. And we need science to sort of show up and be part of the solution. And I don't mean technology per se. I mean science to show up as part of a solution and show that it truly does converge and integrate with universal spirituality into a meaningful, unifying framework that empowers all of us in all our lives to serve a greater good that is our opportunity and is our moment of choice at the moment.
That is wonderful. So it sounds like the ideal, if you wish, or the goal is this reconciliation of materialism and idealism, or material and then the cosmic. And in this perfect balance of understanding, there will be perfect living and cooperation, hopefully love.
Yes, all of that. And I feel even the languaging of materiality. Whoops. I think we're going to. need to reconsider. So like, I was going to say informality, but no, that's not the word I was searching for. But there is this, yes. And I think going back to your previous question about the scientists, it for folks who haven't gone on an inner quest or adventure or experience, this is not an easy concept, because the material world does look very material. And yet when we drill down into it, it's 99%, 99.99999999999% no thingness. And what it is the interrelationships of all of this meaningful information. That's quite a big thing to get your head around if you're taught in a university, the old science, the old physics.